Welcome to the final lesson in Term 1 After Effects. This is going to be dedicated to exporting your video. So you've finished, you're happy with your timeline, you've done all your trickery, you've done all your effects, you're ready to send it off to the client. So in our case, let's just assume everything we see here is our final export, and we want it to finish maybe 5 seconds in this case, so we drag our timeline just to restrict the export area to 5 seconds. You can also do that if you want a more accurate finish or trim to your timeline, so none of this stuff back here winds up on your video. You can simply just go into your composition settings, which is shortcutted by Command K, and just make the adjustments there. So we can also just go 0.5 for your duration, and you'll see that it just crops to 5 seconds. So that's another good way to do it. Probably a more accurate and professional way, if I'm to be perfectly honest. So this little bit of footage is our award-winning piece of food and fire, and we want to export that. Now there's two ways to export. This was touched on a little earlier in the term, but the most simple way to do it is a basic render. And a render means it's just going to see everything on the timeline and send it off and package it up into a little movie file. So let's walk through how we do that. So make sure we're on the actual timeline that we want to render here. So some of these are just little micro scenes within our master. We want to be on master timeline, whatever we've allocated master timeline to as our main working canvas. So we've clicked that, and we go composition, add to render queue, and you'll see our render queue window comes up. There's already a job in there from the other day. Let's just get rid of that. Render queue does queue jobs. It doesn't. You don't have to render straight away. If you want to render at the end of a session, it's sometimes advisable, because once you do hit render, your program becomes disabled while that film strip renders to your final movie file. So that's something to keep in mind. After Effects has a workaround for that, which we're going to touch upon in a second. But for now, let's just get through the render settings. So there's our master timeline project in the window there. Look in the best settings. Everything should just be stock standard of what you've already set up for in your original project file, so no need to really worry about best settings. Your output module. Now, you might have a certain way you need to export this. Someone might have asked for it in a particular way to be supplied, but 9 times out of 10 you're going to export this as a QuickTime file, and you're just going to leave that as RGB. The only time we'd make it RGB in alpha is if you are exporting a transparent piece of film, such as a logo reveal that needs to sit on top of another video. That's when you choose RGB in alpha, which means it keeps your colour schemes but knocks out your background black if you haven't placed a background in there. But for now, let's just keep it on RGB. And we're happy with that, so we go OK. And now we just make a destination folder. So we're going to go into tutorial goodies, and let's just make a new folder there called exports, and we'll call it project 1. Okay, so we've told it where we want it to go. We've set our parameters for what kind of file we want it to be. Now we simply hit render, and as you'll see, the little status bar here, it's going to take a while for this one, but because we've got all that grain and effects on it, but once that gets to this end, your film will be rendered and waiting in that folder where you've allocated it to. So very easy to export. You also get a live preview here, which is handy because sometimes you do pick up mistakes and you quickly reach for the stop button and go back and start it again. If you need to make a second render, just make sure any old jobs in there are just deleted, and you really just start the process again. So go back to your master timeline and turn and add to render queue. Alright, now the second way to export, now this has probably become the more preferred way in After Effects for two reasons. It's an off-site application that comes in your Adobe suite, and it allows you to export via this program here called Adobe Media Encoder. And what it does, it sends all your data to this application so you can keep working on After Effects. The other great advantage with Adobe Media Encoder is that it gives you quite a few more options and codec containers such as MP4s, M4Vs, whatever it is that you've been asked to supply your video in, you're more than likely to find it in Media Encoder. I think it also does GIFs as well, and very handy little things that we will use at News. So not the speediest process, but your job should appear in this window here any second by a little blue link. So what it's doing now, it's telling Media Encoder what files it needs you to render. So it's basically downloading it and putting it into Media Encoder's brain so we can go back in After Effects and keep working. So any second now that's going to appear. Sometimes it can be a little sluggish getting in there depending on the size of your video and how many effects you've got running, but again, it's a very powerful tool, and if you can be bothered waiting and setting up the correct film file types that you need it exported in, it is very handy. So as you can see here, it's just appeared in the job there. So let's just click on this link, and this is basically just telling it where we want to go. So let's go into our tutorials, exports. We want it to go into there, and we'll call it let's call it project 1 Media Encoder. Right, now it's set up as an H.264, which is a standard MP3 MP4 container, but you can click on it and get some more options. This will bring up your different kind of file type options. So you know, it's advisable to do a lot of web stuff in MP4, for example, to keep the size down yet maintain the crispness and the resolution. So there are a few options here. We won't go through them all now, but this one again, the dynamic link server takes a while to get going, but once it does open up, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Basically what we're going to do on this occasion though is tell Media Encoder that we want to export it as it was on the timeline, just as a MP4. So let's go up here. Here's some of our options here. They've got audio, animated GIF, JPEG, MP4, QuickTime, all sorts of different ones here. We're going to stick with H.264, which is MP4. Now the preset, I've got a preset here for 460 pixel square. That's a preset I've left in from another job, so we can also just click on that, and in our case we want to go match source high bit rate. So it's going to copy all the sizing and dimensions from our original file. So we've got encoding format, we're matching source, and we've already told encoder where we want to go where we want to direct it. And what else do we have down here? Just check all our width and height are the same. Yep, we've gone match source. That's right, and we're ready to export. So we go OK. Now, once we've hit OK, there is one more step to start your job, which is this little green button up here. So if you've got a queue of film footages you're exporting, the play button up here will just get them moving for you. And we already know that this is going to take a few minutes. It'll give you a bit of an estimate of how much it's going to take. It looks like about, it keeps going up. But yeah, so you can just move encoder to the side or minimize it, and you can go back to After Effects and keep working, which is a really handy little tool to know. So that basically sums up exporting. We'll get into it a little deeper once we need to export for different file types, but at the moment that's all you'll probably need to know on the basic fundamentals of exporting.